Hi everybody, today is Saturday, February 4th, 2023, and this is Running with Scissors, Stitching with Jane and Julie. Delightful Details number 2, Take the Hard Out of Hardanger, part 1. I'm still Jane.
And I'm Julie. That's quite an introduction you've got going there. Both of us are a little out of sorts as we are in the kitchen and we are not cooking.
Right.
So we will give this our best try with a new format, But we have long-awaited anticipation of this detailed, delightful detail. I am hoping to take you through the very first step to the last step of Hardanger embroidery and show you that it really isn't that hard after all.
Not as hard as it might look.
Jane and I met in a Hardanger class. I was teaching at our local needlework store. And during the class time, Jane had made a very profound statement.
Why is it that the craft I choose to do after a long day in the corporate world is comprised of the two words hard and anger?
Well, that's quite a question for an instructor to get. But I assured her I will help you take the hard out of Hardanger. And that kind of was the birth of this reference book that Jane was a very integral part in its making.
Oh, do you mean this reference book, Julie?
This reference book, Jane? Yes. Available on my website and in DVD format. Thank you.
What a coincidence that we would have a copy right here.
How about that? But we're going to start. I'm so nervous. I know this like the back of my very shaky hand. So
with freshly painted beautiful nails,
well,
by the way.
Yeah, but hangnails that look like small branches. And a couple of paper cuts. That was fun to get yesterday, just what you need. My hands, they're my life. So.
And while Julie is doing the bulk of the teaching, I just want to assure everybody that saw the first delightful details that my M&M game will still be strong today.
Yes.
So we have stop M&Ms, and we have go M&Ms.
Hopefully, we're sitting at a different table and it's at a better height. I don't know about you, but when you're at home stitching, don't you have your arms kind of braced on the side of your chair or your body? And during the first delightful delivery, I was kind of like hanging out in the middle of nowhere without any place to brace my arms. So here we go. We've got some notes just so we can try to stay on track because we sometimes can get derailed. But I would like to start out by saying a few facts, since we're
fact-based,
yes.
Of course.
Hardanger embroidery is typically done on a 22 count fabric, which is a member of the Ada family. We've got 14 count, 16 count, 18 count, 22 count, which is referred to as a Hardanger cloth. This particular fabric has 2 threads to create the weave. I'll just pull a little off the side. You have 2 vertical threads and 2 horizontal threads create the weave. It's really important when working on 22 count that you don't split this weave. Mm-hmm. It will throw your count off. But you can also do it on a linen, 25 count, 28, and 32 is kind of a push because it gets quite small. Which, of course, we all know linen is a single-stranded fiber weave. So no matter if you're doing it on 24 count or on 22, or any other linen count, you still work over the same amount of fabric threads.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that 32 count also gets to be a little dicier is you want to use a finer gauge of pearl cotton as the finer your fabric gets.
Right.
And especially over the last few years, that finest gauge of pearl cotton, in my case, pearl cotton number 12, has gotten very, very difficult
to find.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We'll talk a little bit about fibers. On a 22 count fabric, you're going to use a pearl cotton number 5. There it is. And in Michael's and Joann's and Hobby Lobby, the majority of the colors come in skeins. In the ecru, white, black, more common colors, they do have a 5 in a ball, which is always my preference. And then you will do your finer work in a number 8. So the higher the number, the finer the thread. And then a number 12. So is this all focusing? I hope we're new at this.
It looks good to me.
So here's the fibers that you will use in this. You use them as is. With this, you do not separate any of the fibers. If you're working with an over-dyed watercolors, Karen's, that's a 3-ply that you separate for number 5. But for DMC, you use as is. Then a couple other tricks or tools of the trade are you need a very fine blade. See, let me see. Fine blade, very sharp scissor. I sell these little white-handled scissors, and I do have a few of them left. I also sell, these have a clip top, pink, be them pink, or be them the lavender. They have a longer blade, very, very sharp and fine.
Unless you've been too lazy to find your real scissor, everyday scissor, and you cut mail open with them.
No.
Not quite so sharp and fine.
I also do have on my website left-handed scissors. If there's any of you that have been looking for a left-handed embroidery scissor. Now for needles, we use tapestry needles. They come in 22 tapestry, size 22.
Mm-hmm.
And that's used for your pearl cotton number 5 because it's got a larger eye. It'll be like doing your Hardanger with a sword compared to cross stitch. And then you have a finer needle, which is a 24. That is for your pearl cotton number 8. Excuse me. And then you have a number 26 tapestry you can use for number 12 pearl cotton. You don't want it to fray. You don't want to use a smaller tapestry needle because you're used to that with cross stitch, because it'll fray your pearl cotton. Even though it's a pretty bulky sized fiber, it's not very durable. So when you get your skein, you'll want to take the ends off. And then when you open it up, you'll kind of see where it'll want to naturally divide or not, because they're buggers. We'll start at the knot. Well, this one was not the one to choose. You open it up, and then I cut this little loop. Oh, it's going to be one of those days, Jane. And then this gives you access to your ends. Now, don't cut this. Some gals will cut it in half, so you've got a metered length. What I have found is if you take your own measurement of length and cut it, you have a little bit more flexibility, wouldn't you say, Jane, of when your fiber starts to wear, you want to cut it and take a new one. But when you're locked into that certain length, you maybe have a half a kloster block left and you wish you had more. So I don't suggest that, but that's just my opinion.
And I find whether I'm taking it off the skein or I'm taking off one of the balls, if I hold one end of the pearl cotton between my index finger and my thumb like I'm holding a needle, and then put my arm at a 45 degree angle, and measure down just past my elbow and around, that's really the perfect length and gives me a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, and then just put a little bit more on the end. So, and then we also use tweezer. Whether you have, I have on my website, tweezers in a tube. Or if you have tweezers, I have some in a clip that have a little cap. And of course, I had to put a little fob on that so you don't lose your cap. But tweezers are very helpful, especially pulling those threads out, because they use, what's the word I'm looking for, Jane? Sizing in the fabric makes it kind of tough to use your fingernails to pull it out. So those are the tools. So now, Jane, shall we get started?
Yes, let's talk about the technique.
Okay, I have this square cut here, and I'm going to try to stay on camera, and I can't look at the monitor, think, and stitch at the same time. I'm not that smart, so Jane's going to be my eyes on the monitor for me as well. And she was going to be my Vanna White and clean up my workspace, too, so we have plenty of...
One time I will clean up after somebody, just this once.
So, the very beginning, what do? I want to show you a technique that I learned from my instructor many years ago, and she was a firm believer in basting. Basting thread, this is a button and craft thread that I do sell on my website, but you can buy it at the fabric store. And what I like about this is it's heavy, and it's kind of waxed almost, but it's not. But it doesn't leave a fuzz trail, and I like to use this slate gray. Black, green, red, you'll want to stay away from those colors because they have a tendency to leave a fuzz trail. So I have a needle threaded up, spare you that experience, with some of the basting thread. Now, when you have a doily, you always have a selvage, similar with cross stitch, of at least 3 inches on either side. But what we want to do is find the center of our fabric, and then you will start in the center of your design. Back in the day, you used to get 1/4 of a pattern in those beautiful Nordic needle Hardanger books. You get you get 1/4 of a pattern, and they usually say with an arrow, start here at the edge. And the thing is you can stitch 36 inches one way, 36 inches the other, and if you don't line up at that exact thread, you have no idea where you made your mistake. So my instructor taught us to start in the middle and build outward, and every stitch is placed on accuracy. A lot of kickback from the first class I taught who were anti-basters. They were not happy.
Sometimes it seemed like basting took longer than stitching the actual piece. But it's not a step I would recommend skipping because it has saved my bacon innumerable times.
Yeah. So what we'll do just to start out with is fold your fabric in half and just do a finger crease. And then in that weave, I start in just like 4 threads from the end. You count in 4. You have 4 fabric threads on your needle. Is that visible, Jane?
It is visible. Yep, it looks good.
And so what you'll want to do, I count holes. Okay, with my shaky hand, how am I going to do this? I'll get used to it. 1, 2, 3, 4. And stab down and come back up.
So what you're basically doing is you're going over 4, under 4, over 4, under 4.
Yep. And you're going to make sure you don't pull it out. You can put a knot here if you want. But you're going to do that all the way across in the weave of that fabric. And to spare you the pain of that.
Through the magic of preparation and video.
Ta-da! See how it is? Over 4, under 4, all the way across your piece. Now on a short little one like this, it's fine. On a 36-inch runner, not so much. But you're going to want to do this step. The reason why a kloster block is the building block of your design. It secures the vertical and horizontal threads. That stitch is worked over 4 fabric threads. So by having this as a marker reference of 4 threads, it kind of eliminates you having to count fabric threads. Now you're counting basting threads, whether it's a basting stitch on the front. Now remember, the space is simply a basting stitch on the back. So if you're working off a space or a visible basted stitch, it's the same thing. And also, if you make an error in counting, of course, you'll have to correct it if you went over 5 threads or over 3 threads. This all comes into play with the placement of the design. Now, we're going to want to stitch the other way. Now, of course, you'd think, oh, I'll just fold it in half and finger press. And then Julie says, just count in 4 from the edge. The odds of this lining up with a perfect T, having 2 threads to the right, to the left, to the top, to the bottom, is 0. Pretty darn close to 0.
If you do it that way and they do line up, buy a lottery ticket, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. So
you'll want to press your fabric. Now this happens to be in the center, but what if you press it and it's not? It's like, let's say it's like that. Just go to either the thread or the space. Remember, we've got that 3-inch selvage, so it's not going to matter if you're these few threads off.
No.
What you'll want to do is straddle that basted thread. See how you have 2 to the right, 2 to the left, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. And in my book, what I have is like this. Whether you come up in A, or like I told Jane, I must have changed 10 years ago, or down in A, it doesn't matter. As long as that center basted thread or space is straddled by a horizontal stitch.
Right.
Am I right on that? She's gonna.
I'm nodding.
She's nodding. So you will want to stop short, leaving enough thread to rethread and stitch this way. But for right now, we will just 1, 2, 3, 4 and go carry on all the way across. And my hands will hopefully get a little steadier as we go. So you'll want to do this all the way across. And then when you're to the end, usually what I do is I take my needle out and I pull this. And if you want, you can put a knot in that. And you can pull it so it stops. Then you rethread your needle. And then you continue this way. 1, 2, 3, 4. And just go and continue basting that way with a knot. Don't we all get knots? Now it looks like that or like that. Either way, you have found the center. And so it'll look like this when it's completed. Now this is where we're going to start. A very simplistic kloster block formation, just so we can kind of keep speed through this process of Hardanger. I want you to realize that it's not as hard as it looks. It's kind of overwhelming, and what I'm going to show next is a vertical. So you've got 5 stitches placed, a vertical and a horizontal block. And in a Hardanger's design, that's all there is.
Yeah.
Vertical and horizontal blocks repeated 2,000-3,000 times in a piece. So it's not when you look at a doily think, oh my God, I got to learn all this. Nope. Look at it. It's a vertical and a horizontal block. That's all that's placed. So I've taken pearl cotton, number 5. That's your larger fiber. And the rule of thumb is your fiber should be equivalent, is that the word you use, Jane, to the width of the fabric weave, because you want to cover it up. So this next step is probably the most involved step, easy process, but involved because we're going to count up and we're going to anchor and we're going to bind all at once. And I forgot to say in the beginning, as did you, if you've stitched Hardanger before, you might have flipped out of this by now.
Yeah, please don't go anywhere.
No, because I will show you my anchoring and my binding of both kloster blocks and wrap bars that is flawless. And also the perfect picot, so you'll want to stay tuned.
Yep, even my grandmother would approve of the back of the Hardanger pieces with Julie's technique.
And I hope we didn't lose anybody by not mentioning that sooner, but their loss.
That's
right? Okay. So I'm going to show this next graph because this is the design we're going to do. Well, actually, I'll show you what we're going to do. Maybe that will be more, where'd it go, Jane? Did I have one? Here it is. This is what we're going to stitch, or what I'm going to show you. And you're like, how do you get that centered like that? Well, if you'll take note that this center has 2 threads above, 2 threads below, and the center thread of the kloster block lines up with that basting thread. So we're going to count a half a block, 1, 2, 3. We're going to start forming on the 3rd. See how this goes? 1, 2, 3. Here's your basting threads. 1 full, 2 full, and you're going to place it over that 3rd full basting thread. So we're going to take my piece. Here's our half. Here's our 1 full, our 2nd, and our 3rd. Now, it happens all the time. They go, okay, Julie said to count up 3. 1, 2, 3. I'll place the kloster block. No, that's at the 4th mark. That's why I like to strike the centers. 1, 2, 3. I come over here and I stab down. And this is where I'm going to anchor my thread. I have tried so many different ways. If you anchor it under where the first stitch is going to be, this stitch kicks out to the left. If you anchor it at the center, you really don't have far to work over. I do it the 2nd. Is that visible there?
It is.
Okay, so we are going to place this little A, B back stitch, and the whole kloster block, those 5 stitches are going to be worked over that anchor tail. And it doesn't pull out.
No.
Some instructors will have you like snake underneath. Well, that's unsightly. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But being a nut for perfection, I thought we picked up a shadow. The sun is changing. Sorry. Squirrel. I wanted the back to look as good as the front did. So I'm like, my instructor said, then figure it out. So I did. So what I've done is I'm off to the side. I come up and I'm going to place this A, B stitch. So here's my over 2 threads, and I'm going to come up at the base number 1. I'll show you so you can see what that looks like. And when I pull this thread, see how tight that is? It doesn't really move.
Not going to go anywhere.
No. And now our thread, since we're laying 5, 1, 2, 3 is the center, 4, 5, and we've got it here. 1, we're going to lay over the AB, 3, 4, 5. I use a sewing method, and that's going to be hard for stab and poke stitchers. I have to hold it up here so I can see better. That is going to be hard for stab and poke stitchers, cross stitchers. The reason why is we have to wrap, and I'm going to use my hand like this. We're going to wrap those fibers.
Now, I am a stab and poke cross stitcher through and through. I can't sew in hand. I can't do the sewing method, even if it's on a scroll bar or a Q-snap. And I have to say, you know, even though in class Julie said this might be a struggle for some of you at first that are stabbers and pokers, you adjust very quickly.
Well, the important part is if you go down and I'm going to stab and poke, so there's my stitch, you really don't know where you're supposed to come up next, and you have a tendency to go right next to it. So let's just play that game. You're not bound in the back, are you? You're right next to it. Get that in focus. So you're not bound. Because when you go back and you cut, see, we're going to be cutting. Yes, we're going to be cutting here on these bound edges. And if you cut and you had a stitch side by side, it's going to fall open.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be bound because we're wrapping and securing the vertical and horizontal threads. So now I got to get back on track. Hold, please. Jane has to put the red M&Ms for stop. And we're back on air. No, very good.
Thank you.
Those are very tempting to eat.
I spent a lot of time in elevators.
Yeah. So now we're going to place our fourth stitch. And our fifth stitch. Now, where are we going to go after that fifth stitch? We're going to do a horizontal block this way. Now, you could go from up here to here, but I always say you'll have an unsightly panty line in the back, and I don't like that.
The dreaded panty line.
We want the back to look like the front.
And the other thing is, like, let's say you are doing it on this very crisp, clean, white Hardanger fabric, and you decide you want to do it in a color like this lavender or red or whatever, you can see the shadow of that traveled
thread.
pearl cotton
Yep.
underneath your pristine white.
So now what I'm going to do on the vertical block is come right back up at number 9 in the same hole. And then I'm going to count over 1, 2, 3, 4. I split the thread, so I'll adjust that. And then I'll tip up again here. Now, you have a tight closed corner too, because they share
the hole.
The hole. Now you can use your basting threads by going, oh look, that lines up. And this lines up. So that's going to be great. Oh, Jane just reminded me I should drop my magnifiers. Thank you. Thank you, Vanna. I'm struggling. I'm like, why is this? Why am I not seeing this? Earlier I had them up because I couldn't talk to her with them up. I was nauseous.
Nobody needs to see that up close.
So we're just going to go, oh, look, I can see the holes. I'm just, you silly girl. Silly girls.
Go, Julie.
Yeah.
Go, Julie. Go, Julie.
Green. We're in the kitchen and we're catching the sun as it's moving to set.
That beautiful winter light.
So we're just going to bask in it. Okay, now Julie says to come up in that same hole. What's our needle telling us? We're not going that way. We're not going that way. We're going to drop down. So on this last stitch, we're going to drop down and come up 4 stitches. And then, since they have to share a common hole at the corner, we'll just proceed. So I shall stitch the best. Am I on? The best I can. I haven't taught a class in 6 years.
Well, and you know, I should mention too, Julie has not only Take the Heart Out of Hardanger as that reference book, but Take the Heart Out of Hardanger is also a class that's on a DVD.
Yes.
And I have watched that DVD I don't know how many times. Even as a more experienced, I guess, Hardanger stitcher. It's a great, great reference tool.
And that comes with a fabric and fiber kit, so you can stitch along with that pattern if you choose.
Excellent.
Now we've just finished the vertical block, so we have to come up in the exact same hole again, because remember, we're learning the vertical and the horizontal and the vertical, and now we're going to do a horizontal because that's just how we repeat it as we go. So steady my hand, and on the DVD I'm not shaking.
Well, and notice that the hole that Julie did away, counting over 4, lines up with that basting thread.
Yep.
So everywhere you go,
see,
you're aligning to that basting thread.
Now, once you've come to the basting thread, and if you've also noticed, I never turned my piece. Mm-hmm. I held the piece in my hand, and this hand moved the different ways. But now that I'm at the basted line and my center third stitch lines up with the basting, that's your go ahead to turn it. And then all it is you're going to repeat that all again. And you're going to work your way all around this center piece. So here's number 4, and then in this 5th one, you come up in the bottom again, and then you count over 4 threads. And you can use your basting to make sure that you're on thread. And you can even go across this way. So it's a constant checkpoint. So if you made a mistake and it wasn't the center thread, then you know your error is in that area. So you're building on accuracy all the way around. Mm-hmm. Now,
sometimes your basting thread may be a thread off because you weren't paying attention, mm-hmm. or you were just kind of over the basting part and not paying attention. But now at least you know between this kloster block and this kloster block, I either missed something when I was forming my kloster blocks, or I've got an error in my basting.
Yeah.
So one of the other reasons that you really want to pay attention and take your time and be very thorough with your basting thread, because it will eliminate that variable that your basting thread
right.
will be off.
And don't pull a Kim. Remember in class, that first class, everybody, it was every Wednesday. So the next Wednesday when they all came to class, I'm like, so how'd it go? Oh, they all just complained about the basting. And someone goes, well, I thought it was great. And then Kim had said, well, I was off a thread. I'm like, well, that's good. Then you have to change. She goes, no, I moved my basting thread to line up. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
I had forgotten.
Boy. So that was don't pull a Kim. If you're off with your basting thread, either your basting thread was placed in error or your kloster block was. As with cross stitch, if you've made 3 greens and 2 blues instead of 4 greens and 2 blues, no one's going to know. In Hardanger, if you do 6 threads instead of 5 threads, you're in a world of hurt because it's all kind of fall apart.
Everyone will know.
Yeah.
The whole town will be talking.
Okay. So now I'll spare you. Let's say we've gone all the way around. And now it's going to be, how do we bind this off? Well, I will finish the last kloster block. And I lined up in that same hole. Now, on the back side, you'll turn your piece over. You'll say, oh no, I must have screwed up. Look at, there's only 4 threads there. Well, no, wait. That's how the back looks. Mm-hmm. So don't be afraid. Don't think you've screwed up, because you haven't. Now, to bind this off, I used to say push against the pad of your finger, catching a fabric thread, making sure you haven't penetrated the front with a big old stitch in there. Is that in focus?
Mm-hmm.
And slide it through. Now that was good enough for me for 25 years. I've never had one come out. But some gals really challenged me on it, so I told them, if you're insecure about it, go over the last stitch.
That's what I do.
And go over the last stitch again. Then you'll want to clip this closely and then pull this one. This was your anchor. And clip that. Now, you have no snaking underneath, no traveling anywhere, and really, front and the back. That's why, I think you're going to say this, Jane. You should always put a little knot well, I can't even tie a knot today. They'll freely come later, I'm sure, when you don't want them, to indicate the front of your piece.
Yeah.
Because if you go answer the phone and come back, it's real easy to pick it up and stitch on the wrong side.
And it's a great habit to get into, not only for that reason, but also as you get into the rest of the structure of the doily and you're doing eyelets. As we talked about in one of the episodes of Running with Scissors, eyelets have a certain spin to them,
Mm-hmm.
and the top of the fabric will be important.
Yep.
So it'll really serve two purposes. You'll always know what is the top of your fabric, so you're working on the right side. And that as you get into doing eyelets, all of your eyelets will look the same and be consistent if you
Mm-hmm.
always start with the knot at the top.
At
That kind of
12
gets
o'clock.
to be your true North Star.
Yep. 12 o'clock, I always used to
Yes.
say with the 12
Well,
o'clock.
it's noon somewhere.
Yeah.
Bottoms up, everybody.
Now, there isn't a doily made in the world that you can do a complete round with one thread. So Jane said, I forgot how to start a new thread. So I thought, well, look what I've done. No. Let's say we've gone this way, we were correct, and now we're here, and I ran out of thread. So what you do is, this is how it would be presented in your hand. You kind of have to, I told one gal really struggled with how in class, really struggled on how to do this, starting a new thread. And I was getting slightly, not irritated, but I didn't know what more I could do to
Sure.
explain it, because it was just, had a mental block.
Yeah.
So I said, ask your needle. Had I not run out of thread, where would I be coming up? Well, on this particular block, you'd be coming up right here. Now I have to, right here. That's where you'd be coming up. So this is where you'd be coming up, but you don't want to baste it, or you don't want your anchor thread in a working hole.
Right.
So you just diagonal to here. Now it's out of that first stitch. And being that we're going to place a vertical block, you'll want a vertical basting, and you'll come up right like that. So with this pull of this thread, there's your tail that we're going to work over, and you're going to place your 4 stitches, or your 5 stitches over 4 threads. And we have sirens outside, Jane. Are you by the fire department?
Yeah, the fire department is just across Old Cedar, so it's
That's
maybe
right.
3 or 4 blocks away.
Yeah. And you'll continue. Now let's just say, for demonstration's sake, this is where you needed to start a new thread.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be coming up at the base of this stitch. Well, you certainly can't come up there. So you would just diagonal over into the working area. I split a thread. That's not good. Happens to all of us. Hold, please.
Julie needs to flip her welding glasses down.
Oh, I did it again, didn't I? Jane.
I do it all the time.
You should be doing the video, not me.
Oh.
And see how this works, and then you will just place one here. So that's how you start a new thread.
And it's exactly like when you anchored your very first kloster
Yep.
block. It's just that you already have some other kloster blocks around it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a mental block, I don't know how to do it. You can think to, what if I needed to start my very first kloster block
Yep.
here? And it's the same
Yep.
exact thing.
Well, I told that lady, I said, you just ask your needle. Because sometimes our heads are telling us far more information, to the left, to the right, over to the two. And I said, ask your needle, because your needle knows where it would come up next.
Oh
and
my God, you got to thread the eye of a needle. You got to
but
talk
you know
to a
what
needle.
she said? They were all stitching. Everybody was doing their thing, and someone took their needle out of their thread. And I thought, oh, good, they found their mistake. They're going to go back it out. And I said, did you find your mistake? She goes, no, I'm getting a new needle. This one doesn't know a damn thing. She said.
This one doesn't know where it's going. Must be
So,
a male needle that
yeah.
won't ask for directions.
Exactly. So that's how you would start a new thread. So now I wanted to show you, here's what we've got. Sometimes in a pattern, you might see this. All this is an adjoining row of kloster blocks. And that's just by skipping a basted thread and going and starting your kloster block up and continuing by connecting them all. They're all common holes in the corners. And in this format, you might find that there's eyelets. There's one thing I wanted to show you. See how this is a bound edge here? See how this isn't? These are open. And to my knowledge, after all these years, nothing goes in these areas at all because they're not secure.
Yeah, and I always remember when I'm looking at it, especially when I get ready to cut, I call those bound edges knuckles.
Yep.
They look like knuckles if you close your hand and make a fist.
My instructor always used to say, you'll want to cut on the knuckles. We've placed 5 stitches. We've only bound 4 threads. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then remember, Jane, she'd say, don't cut here with her little crippled hand. She'd go, no, don't cut. So, but that has stuck with us all these years, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes you can just add a buttonhole edge. And that is just a blanket stitch all the way around. And just to honor Jane with the eyelets, sometimes they actually have an eyelet. If you can see, right here is an eyelet.
Yep.
See
Or
if
if
I
it's
can
one of
focus
Julie's
it.
designs, 643 eyelets.
Or is that showing there? Now you can see the eyelet. Right?
Mm-hmm.
See, with my magnifiers on,
Maybe put it down a little bit. There you go.
with the magnifiers on, I can't see the monitor.
Yeah.
Learning curve. Everything's a
That
learning
looks
curve,
great.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So in part 2 of Take the Heart Out of Hardanger, our next delightful detail, we're going to go over eyelets, we're going to go over buttonhole, and we're going to go over a little bit different advanced wrapping on a diagonal. But for right now, I want to show you these things because you'll see these shapes. You'll see a buttonhole edge, and I wanted you to know that that's part of the process. But right now, I want to get to the cutting because that's where everybody thinks the world comes to an end because you're going to cut.
Why are you looking at me like that?
I'm looking at you through my magnifiers. Now, this should really be a comical thing right now, watching Julie try to cut. I'm sitting with my arms supported thinking that will help. I think I need jammies and no bra and a Diet Coke.
Yeah.
And then I'll really be able to cut.
Yes.
So I have in my illustration, I want to show you this. This is a diagram that we are only going to cut on the bound edges.
Cut your knuckles.
Cut the knuckles. And we're only going to cut 1, 2, 3, 4 fabric threads. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the reason why I have them numbered that way is because you're going to clip, 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 and then you're going to clip, clip, clip. And your tendency is to turn your piece and clip this way. If you snipped this unbound thread, you will cry.
I can.
Yep.
I know from personal experience. Yes.
Yep. If you clip this way on that last corner, if you slipped and accidentally cut this kloster block, this can be replaced. This, I won't say is tragic. It can be repaired.
It's a lot of work.
But for first-time apprehensive cutters, I like to go 1, 2, 3, 4, cut this way, and then cut up to it. And this is a no, because you can stick your needle under there, or scissor tip, because it is not bound and secured.
And you know, all this time, Julie, all of the pieces I've done, this is the first time that it's dawned on me that when you get to that third time that you have to cut from the bottom to the top instead of the other way.
Yep.
Because I've always cut this way. Cut, cut, cut.
Cut.
And this is where I always get myself in trouble. So I've even learned something today.
Good.
Go this way.
I'm surprised I didn't tell you that. Oh, you know what? I think after years and years of teaching, I kind of changed that. I maybe might not have told us that in the very beginning. As with anything, it's evolving. I find even now, it's not like you're going to stitch a stunt doily and then do the real one. It's constantly changing in techniques and in what your ability is. With my shaky hand now, I think I'll just let you cut it.
Oh God! But the new lesson comes at a great time because I still have so much of Sophie to cut.
Yes.
So this was great.
So it's up, across, and then back up, and then no. And in class, I encourage them to say no, because you'll go, I'm cutting. Look at, I'm cutting, and 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 your whole center falls out.
Yeah.
And then I can't fix that. So bear with me. I know we're all friends here. And no judgment zone.
I'm praying. As soon as the cutting starts, I pray.
Okay, let me do it up here off screen. I learned last night to steady my... Now, you can snip, snip, snip. Or you can... And I want to see a tip. Oops. Maybe on the monitor I'll see a tip. See my scissor tip? Can you see that? Not really, can you?
Yep, you can.
Okay, and then I clip that last one. You are, on the graph here, let's go over this. You are clipping in that weave.
Right up against the
Right
knuckles.
up against that stitch. And then you turn it. I have to, excuse me. Surprising. Now you know how sad I am that I don't do this anymore. Here's the tip. Oops. This is ridiculous, Jane. And you clip. Now, isn't it, Jane, your tendency to go like this?
Absolutely. I've always done it that way.
So go from here. On screen. Am I okay?
You're okay.
See?
Oh, so much easier.
So now... To think I used to do this dead-eyed. without any magnification or aging can be very painful, right?
Yeah.
Unkind. I'm glad I did all those beautiful things and creations when I had good hands. And am I on screen, Jane?
You are now, yep.
Oh, sorry. Tell me when I'm not, so they're not watching dead air. I still question, you sure we want to do this on a video? But I feel we have so much to share, don't we?
We really do. And this is a very important foundation because, you know, like Julie said earlier, you open a book and you see this fabulous runner that you want to make for a table or a doily, and it's a huge piece, and you think, I could never do that. It's all of these same things. It's kloster blocks, it's buttonhole, it's eyelets, it's some cable.
I did it.
We'll show you. And sometimes some surface satin work.
Yep, we'll do that on the next one too. Okay, so now we've successfully, most important thing,
Breathe.
you got to breathe. I can teach a class and it is dead silent. And I go, ladies, you have to breathe. And everybody just goes, oh, I didn't realize I was holding my breath. So now what we have to do is release the threads from their weave.
I love those little tweezers.
Yeah.
And I like the ones that clip, the points clip into that, little tail, because it's a great excuse for stitching jewelry.
Oh, yeah.
The fobs.
Now, these are it looks kind of aggressive because it is. There's quite a weave on here. And I probably should have pulled both my square ends off, and then that would have freed it up a little bit more. But once you get them all done and you make your little mess all over everything.
As Julie calls your clippy mess.
Your clippy mess all over your floor and your jammies. This is what you have left.
And I refer to this as your tic-tac-toe grid.
Yep, she does all the time, your tic-tac-toe grid. Your vertical and horizontal threads. This is what you wrap or weave to make all your pretties.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do that right now. Yes, I hope you're all still with us. I have taken some pearl cotton, number 8, and that is a finer fiber. And that's what we're going to use in our 24 tapestry needle. Now, this is where, here's my quilter's knot. Lay your needle, pinch, wrap, 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 wrap. Grab it with your fingernail and slide it through to make your knot.
I think quilter's knots are magical things.
Yes. Now, you will want to anchor quite far away because you will re-thread this tail. So I like to stab way off here. And if you can see, focus, maybe down a little more.
Yep.
I'm going to put the needle in the center of those 4 fabric weave threads. Maybe I'll set it down, is it because in the center. See how we have it in the center? If you look really close, and I don't think I can get really close because I think I shake and that's why it tries to focus. You actually have, remember, 2 threads equal a weave.
Mm-hmm.
So you really have 2, 4, 6, 8 threads. Technically, if we're fact-based, you have 8, but you only have 4 threads of the weave. Is that correct, Jane? Is that? So now that you have it up in the center of those 4 threads, we are going to wrap with a figure 8 motion. And I've got a little chart for that as well. Oh, I didn't bring the plain wrap one, did I? Here's what we were looking for. This diagram shows the plain wrapped bar. We've brought our needle and thread up in the center of these 4 threads to be wrapped. We're going to start with a lower wrap and an upper wrap, and a lower wrap and an upper wrap, creating a figure 8 around the 4 threads that we want to plain wrap. So start with a lower wrap, bring the needle up in the center, and then you're going to pull that thread. Give it a little tug. 22 count fabric is pretty forgiving, so you can give it quite a tug. Upper wrap, you'll go down in this center hole, but bring it back up in the center of the 4 threads to be wrapped. There's another lower wrap. Now you're going to go in this hole. If I had clear hands, it would be so much easier. But you're going to tip up in the center of those 4 fabric threads to be wrapped. Is that clear, Jane?
Yep, it's clear.
Okay. That's the hardest part of doing this video that's so frustrating, is your hands are your worst enemies. So we're going to do another lower wrap, tipping your needle up in the center of those 4 fabric threads to be wrapped. So with this figure 8 motion, I don't really know how else to explain it. Just wrapping the top 2 threads together and the lower 2 threads together. Coming up in the middle after each one, coming up in the center of the 4 fabric threads to be wrapped. Is that a little bit more clear, Jane?
Mm-hmm.
Help me out here. I feel like I'm drowning.
Oh, I thought you were just waving.
No. Now, someone usually asks what, Jane?
How many wraps should I put on the each bar?
I am one that counts but doesn't count. I'm going to move this chart so we can see a little better with the background. If I said 7 on the top and 6 on the bottom, that's what you'd place. The most important thing is that the bar is completely wrapped.
But not so tightly it's distorted.
Correct. And not under wrapped. We're going to the next bar. We'll create a circular. You won't have a nice crisp corner. What I wanted to show is right now my thread is in the lower position. Now I'm really cautious of this camera focus. It's in the lower position, where if I had my needle up here, my needle would be in an upper position. Well, if I were to go to the next set of 4 threads like this, when it's in the upper position, I'd have an unsightly panty line on the back.
Mm-hmm.
Very forgiving. I can sneak another one in, just kind of push them to the side so I'm in the lower part. When you travel to the next block, you want to be in the lower position so you will make a nice crisp corner. Now you can't wrap sideways. At this point, you turn your fabric and your thread is in the center, and we start with a lower wrap. Now someone will say, why don't you start with an upper wrap? I've tried it, and it actually leaves a tiny little hole space that I don't like the looks of. Mm-hmm. Plus, now this makes a nice, tight, clean corner.
And as a right-hander, and coming from a culture that always reads from left to right, it was counterintuitive to me that you always wrap from right to left.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. We're wrapping right to left in a counterclockwise direction.
Yeah.
Our kloster blocks were done in a clockwise direction. Our wrapping is in a counterclockwise direction. And these are right-handed instructions. I have had some left-handed stitchers be able to stitch this way. I have taught, and I do know how to stitch left-handed, but that's a whole nother session. So what you do is you just continue with an upper wrap and a lower wrap and an upper wrap and a lower wrap. And this is what's referred to as a plain wrapped bar or plain weaving. I call it wrapping. So now there are so many stitches, filling stitches, that can be, and sometimes you can just strike the center. Don't be alarmed if yours look kind of chunky. Your first few stitches are really kind of chubby, and then you fall into your rhythm. Wouldn't you say, Jane, it's a rhythm and it's a tension that you adapt. It's not.
Yeah.
Everybody's wrapping is different.
Yeah, and your consistency always is better after you've done, 2 or 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah. So now what I want to show you is a picot.
Oh, good. I need a picot refresher.
A picot stitch placement never interrupts the flow of a planed wrap bar. So it's not like you're going to do the plain wrap and then go put a picot in. You're going to form the picot on the lower wrap and go and form the upper picot or the outer picot on the upper wrap.
You're going to peek as you go.
Yes, exactly. So I'm going to bring my needle up in the center of the 4 threads and I'm going to turn it. I am going to place a lower wrap, and this is consistent, and an upper wrap, and another lower, and an upper. I'm going to place, this is my third upper. It's on the 4th. And this is always the 4th. If you do it on the 5th, it's going to be a little too far to the left. If you do it on the 3rd, always on the 4th lower wrap. You bring it up in the center just like you're going to do
another
plain wrap. And you're going to draw it to form a small loop. Now, hopefully I'm going to watch the monitor. Tip it to the left. See how the loop goes to the left? You'll bring your needle up from behind into the loop once, into the loop twice. Kind of with dark thread. I didn't know what thread to use. Now, you're going to draw this loop down to the weave. And if I can hold it up there, do you see that tiny little knot? As you bring back up in the center,
here, let's see.
Will that help? Up in the center. See the picot? Can I hold it up here? Let's see. See that picot? Does that help, Jane?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Now to do the upper one. Now we've never done this before on video. See how the loop lies to the left, upper to the left?
Yeah.
Just put your thumb on there. Go up through this once. Go through it again twice. And this one you hold straight up and draw it down. And when you bring it back, see it up on the top? I hope that's clear enough for everybody. Now you just pretend like you go back in the center like you did for a plain wrap.
Like you're completing the upper wrap and going to do another lower. Look
See how that is? Then you create another lower wrap.
And just finish wrapping the bar.
And finish wrapping the bar out. I need to put my hand down for a minute. And I usually get 3 sets. Because you can use your needle to kind of slide them over to sneak them in. And then I like to strike the centers.
Amazing.
Now, with focus here, where's my paper? Did we have a paper, Jane? Ta-da!
Oh, I have it upside down.
This is how we do it. And actually, the verbiage in the book is exactly what I just said. You complete 3 lower wraps, and you have this top loop laid to the left, and you go through it once, twice, and then you pull it towards you, and it forms the little knot. Then you go back up through the center, and you go through it once, twice, and pull it straight up. I used to pull it this way, but you'd separate the two, and you'd get a teeny tiny little hole right there, which bothered me.
Why. Okay.
Yeah, pull it straight up, and then lay it back, and then come back up in the middle with your needle to continue the wrap. Now, it had been about, I'd say, a good 16 years Tom had done the shows with me. He'd have 2 chairs in the booth, and someone would say, I just didn't get that, how to do that. I'd tell him at class, if you don't understand, don't dwell on it, come down to the booth and I'll show you. So I would demonstrate a picot 20 times a day easily. And so, Sunday afternoon, there you could bowl down the aisles of any trade show because everybody's gone their flights home. And he was standing there, and he went over to my doodle cloth, and he picked it up, and he said, I never understood what was so hard about this, what they struggle with. And he picked that fabric up, and he said, you'd start with a lower wrap, and then you do an upper wrap, then you do another lower wrap. Okay, on the 4th lower wrap, you make a loop, you tip it to the left, and you go through it twice, and you pull it. Then you go up in the middle, and you have an upper loop, and you tip that to the left, and you go through it twice, and you pull it straight up. He goes, I don't know what the big problem is. I didn't have any trouble at all. An electrician with no feeling in the fingertips of his hands left after all these years. I looked at him and I said, I have never been more attracted to you in my whole entire life. If he can do it,
and he was listening.
And he was listening all those years. That's the remarkable part of the story.
Yeah, that's hot.
Yeah, it was hot. So once again, you bring your needle up in the center of the 4 threads to be wrapped. You start with a lower wrap, give it a little tug, and an upper wrap. I kind of use my thumb to position them. Do you do that, Jane?
I do, except I don't have any thumbnails, so I have limited success.
Oh.
But it still keeps things tight and from unraveling.
And then another one. So I'm just getting to that picot part, and then we'll slow her down again. Slow-mo. Bring the needle up in the center. Draw a small loop and tip it to the left. Come up through the loop once, twice, and draw the loop towards you and give it a tug. Do we want a white paper behind it again, Jane? Did that help?
I think it helps.
Then come back up in the center of those 4 threads to be wrapped, and that kind of sets it. Then make an upper loop. Stop. Sometimes you have to turn this one so the top thread goes to the left. Come through it once, up through it twice, and then hold this one straight up from the fabric with my big clunky hands in the way, straight up. Then when you lay it back, this whole auto focuses. There. See?
Amazing.
Then you just wrap out the remaining bars. Okay, now when you go to bind off this fiber, You want to finish out the bars so they're nice and crisp. See how we really didn't alter the weave of the fabric to create the design? It still has that crisp square look to it, like the cut one. See how we really didn't distort that weave? That's what I like. Some of them you do. Some of them you have to really overpack them to bow them for different
Some
stitches.
Of the other feeling stitches.
Now, to bind this off on the back side, you drop it down. On the back side, you will run your needle underneath the wrapped bar. Easy for you to say. Hang on. Hold, please. Okay. Then you, I slid it under this side of the wrap bar, and then you can go up the next side. Now, you'll notice if you are a tight wrapper or a loose wrapper, this may be a struggle or not, but this allows you to wrap under what you've just stitched rather than anchor off in a kloster block. Now, I'm all excited and I'm going to snip that, and then I'm going to want to snip this, but what is that knot telling us? This is not secure. That's why you put the knot. Do not clip that because this is not secure. So what you'll do is clip that. What are the odds of me being able to thread this needle chain?
You're a better woman than I, because I struggle. I'm licking,
I got
biting
it.
it.
That's why you kind of want to leave a long enough tail. But what you'll do is slide this. Did I leave a long enough one?
You can do it.
I can. Slide it underneath that wrapped bar, that very first one we did. Give it a tug and clip it off. So now,
once again,
here's your back side. Here's your front side.
Flawless.
Back side. Front side. If your picot falls apart, it says here in my verbiage, if it falls apart, it's because your needle was on the wrong side of the working thread, and all it'll do is disintegrate. It won't make a knot.
And you just start over and do it again.
Yep. So in the next delightful detail, if we survive eating all these M&Ms, that's our reward.
Sugar coma.
We want to go over the buttonhole edge, stitching at a diagonal, because not all your pieces are going to be a perfect little square like this. So we're going to demonstrate how to stitch at an angle, how to journey all the different stitches. Picot, sometimes there's picots on the outside and dove's eyes in the middle. We're going to go over the eyelet. We could touch on surface work. Tom calls that flat stuff. And
my favorite cable stitch.
Cable stitch, double and triple cable. So this just gives you a glimpse into Hardanger, that it's not as hard as you think it is.
Right.
And I want to thank you for bearing with me with my shaky hand. This is really different doing it tabletop versus a video when we're just sitting and talking, running with scissors.
It is different.
So maybe the next one I'll have Jane sitting behind the wheel here and I'll just tell her what to do.
Jane, take the wheel. Take it from...
You think so?
We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll negotiate.
Do we have anything more to cover?
I think this was a great glimpse of the basics, the basting and the importance of that, the starting and anchoring the kloster blocks, their journey around the kloster block, where to cut, where not to cut, and then how to do that plain wrap and the perfect picot. I think it's a great start.
Well, and if you find you have a sampler that has a little bit of Hardanger in it, now I hope this takes a little bit of the fear out of it, that it's not as hard as you would think it would be.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. It was an learning experience for me and Jane for how to do this. Always learning, that's part of the process in needlework and in life. So you want to give them some logistics on where they can find us next?
So we will post this episode to Running with Scissors, Stitching with Jane and Julie on YouTube. You will be able to find it there. Well, if you're watching it, I guess you already found it there.
Oh, that's true.
And episode number 17, I can't believe that, we will film our regularly scheduled program on Friday, February 10th.
Yes.
And another delightful detail will come your way as soon as we get it done.
As soon as I get my homework done.
I'm not going to make any promises how many days or weeks it will be, but I think we've built up some momentum now, and that'll be coming to you soon. And we'll give you a heads up in our Jane and Julie forum about when you might be able to expect that, when we know.
Yep. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I hope you'll take a chance on a new form of needlework and give Hardanger a try. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Happy stitching.
Bye.